Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniela. Thank you so much for being here today. Today we are going to talk about the 14 books that I've read so far this year in January, February, and March, and the one book that I sadly had to DNF. Honestly, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's just dive right in. I am pulling up my story graph. I thought it would be fun to share some stats of all of the books that I've read this year. So without further ado, let's talk January books. In January, I read 7 books for a total of 2,624 pages. The main moods were tense, dark, and adventurous. I mostly read kind of like fast or medium-paced books. My average page number was from 300 to 500 pages. That's like the sweet spot for me. And I only read fiction books in January. My main genres were young adult and fantasy with a little bit of romance. I read more digital than print books. So lots of Kobo Kindle reading has happened this year. You're gonna see that a lot. And then my average rating for January was a 4.25 star. Okay, the very first book that I picked up this year was Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to the book Divine Rivals, and I absolutely adore that book. I read it not knowing that it was a duology, but I luckily read it in December, like right before this second book came out. And so once the second book came out, I rushed to reading it and I really enjoyed it. I think I agree with the general consensus that it definitely was not as good as Divine Rivals, but I still had a really good time reading it. I love this world. I feel like it's such a good fantasy series to get you into fantasy because the world is really not that different from ours. It's kind of like Greek mythology meets like kind of World War II vibes. There's not much that I can say because this is the second book in a duology. I definitely preferred Divine Rivals, but any little bit of romance between Roman and Iris, just so good. The letters, everything. I just really enjoyed this, and I think I enjoyed the plot of this maybe more than most people did, and I did give it 5 stars, which this is one of the ones where I know this was not a 5-star book, but it just like hurt my soul to give this book anything less than that because I loved Divine Rivals so much. Like that book was my whole personality for a little bit. I absolutely loved it so much. So the first book I read was Ruthless Vows. After that, I picked up The Cruel Prince because I was in a bit of a fantasy kick, and I've always been curious about this book. I've heard so many good things about it, and so I decided to pick it up in January. I did not like this book, and I wasn't gonna continue with the series. Like, this book took me so long to get through, and it was just a lot of work that didn't feel like it was worth it. But I ended up picking up the second and third books just on a whim. I was out of town, and I had them from the library on my Kindle, and so I thought, whatever. And I absolutely loved the second book specifically. I really liked, but I really loved the second too. So this book was quite a bit of work, but I think it was worth it. I found myself really falling in love with this series and like watching all of the TikTok videos, looking up like Jude and Garden, and like I really dove into it. I loved this series and I had so much fun with it. So The Cruel Prince is about Jude, and she was stolen as a child from the human world and lives in the fairy world. This is the first time I've read anything in like a fae sort of world, and so that was really difficult. Like the world building and kind of getting into that was challenging for me. But she lives with the fae, and the fae don't really like humans, and so she is really bullied, and she's trying to like prove herself as worthy and prove herself as a human, that like even though she's just a mortal, like she's just as strong as the fairies and she can do just as much as they can. So yeah, this is a YA. There is romance, but it's not a romance story. The romance is like a deep subplot. It is mostly a fantasy book. I didn't really like the first one. I absolutely loved the second one, and I really enjoyed the third one as well. So those are the next 3 books. After that, I picked up Daisy Jones and the Six. This is one of my very favorite books of all time. I absolutely love Daisy Jones. This was one of the first books that I picked up, if not the first book that I picked up when I first got back into reading, and so it really holds a special place in my heart, and I wanted to reread it because I haven't come back to it for a really long time. I read it in 2019, and then I watched the show. I actually have watched every episode of the show except for the last one because I just like was not ready for it to end. So I've watched the show, and then I thought I had kind of spaced it out enough that I could come back to the book. I love watching adaptations, but I feel like I need to space it out so that I'm not comparing it too much. And then like I enjoy the show for the show and I enjoy the book for the book, and they're like similar but different. This book, it just will always be a 5-star for me. I love it so much. If you've not read it, Daisy Jones and the Six is about a girl named Daisy and a band called the Six, and they are both kind of like rising to fame in the 60s, and they get kind of put together to do a single. The single blows up, and then the label that the band is on suggests that they do an entire record together. And so this story is told in interview format. It's so interesting. There's a really fun twist at the end that will like, your jaw will drop, and it's just such a great book. It's really, really well told, and it's really fun, a really easy format to read too. After that, I read 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is a YA thriller, and it's about a girl and 5 of her friends, so there's 6 of them that go on a road trip. They're driving from, I don't know where, they're driving from somewhere kind of like north in the US down to Florida for spring break. They rent an RV and they all drive down together, and they're on their first night of the drive and they make a wrong turn, and well, the book is called 5 Survive. There are 6 of them that get onto the RV and 5 of them survive. This book was really fun. I don't think I love thrillers as much as I love mysteries, because I like when a mystery is like, you can, I don't know, I think for me, like, thrillers can be so outlandish and so out there, and I love when like I like mysteries that just like make sense and you can put the pieces together. This was like a little bit wild, but it was really, really fun. I read this in one afternoon. It was such a quick read, and I had a good time with it. I have read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I haven't finished the rest of the series. I just read the first book and I enjoyed it, so I just left it at that. This was really fun. It wasn't like a favorite book of mine. It's not one that I've ever thought about since then, but the twists are really interesting and it's a great read, so I do recommend that one. Next, I picked up Ghosted by J.M. Darhauer. This book, I was just looking at this list of books that I've read, and I read it 2 months ago, I guess now. I don't remember even reading this book. I don't remember anything about the plot. So it wasn't super memorable to me, but I do think I enjoyed it. This book is about Kennedy and Jonathan, and they are high school sweethearts, but this is like a second chance. So this is many years down the road. Okay, now that I think about the plot, I do remember liking this book. Okay, this is about Kennedy and Jonathan, and this is a second chance. So they were high school sweethearts, but now it's been several years, and Jonathan always wanted to be an actor, and he's become successful, and so he is in a huge like superhero movie franchise, kind of like the Marvel universe. So he's like a big superhero, and Kennedy is in their little hometown, and she has a daughter, and she's just living day by day, paycheck to paycheck, and this is their story of coming back together. I typically don't like second chance, but I did enjoy this one because it felt more realistic. I think it was only like 4 or 5 years later. It felt like they just had kind of been apart for a little while, and they really did feel like they belonged together, and they treated each other with respect. They treated each other like adults. There was good communication. So yeah, I did enjoy it, but it is not one that I've thought about even once since I put it down. That was the last book that I read in January. Now let's talk February. Okay, in February, I read 5 books for a total of 1,705 pages. The moods were way less this month. I mostly read lighthearted, funny, and then a little bit of emotional and adventurous. Same kind of pacing, medium to fast pace. And this month I read some shorter books. So 3 to 500 and less than 300. Again, only fiction book. And in February, I mostly read romance because it was February. Also in February, all of my books were digital. I didn't read a single physical copy of a book. I had a pretty average reading month, no 5-star books. Okay, the first book that I picked up in February was The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I really enjoy Beth O'Leary's writing. I've read 2 books by her before. I've read The Flatshare and The Switch, and both of those were 5-star books for me. I really liked them. So I picked up The Road Trip and I was really excited for it because I've loved the books that I've read from Beth O'Leary in the past, and at first I adored this book. The beginning, like 40 or 50 pages, I was having so much fun. I was like giggling, kicking my legs, having such a good time, and then it really took a turn for me and I did not enjoy this book at all in the end. This book follows Addie and Dylan, and again, it's a second chance romance, which they really don't work for me, so I don't know why I keep reading them. But Addie and Dylan are on their way to their best friend's wedding and they end up in a car accident, so they have to carpool together, and they broke up about a year or 2 ago, so they have not seen each other. They're like gonna see each other for the first time at the wedding, but they end up in this little mini squished together with Addie, her sister, Dylan, his best friend, and then a random guy that they've offered to drive to the wedding, that's going to the wedding and didn't have a way there. I thought this was really fun at first. I love a road trip. We were about to go on a road trip, so that's why I picked this up. I thought the forced proximity was so fun. They were all just like squished in this little mini together, and the friends, like this Addie's sister hates Dylan, Dylan's friend hates Addie. They're like so much conflict. You have no idea why they broke up. You have no idea what happened, but there's so much tension, and there's like, it was actually just very comedic in the beginning. There were really good jokes. I was laughing. I was having a good time. And then I got into it and I was like, what is going on? I think like Addie and Dylan were not meant for each other. Like there's a reason why they broke up. This, like, their relationship, you can see, kind of started as a fling, and I think that's really where it should have stayed. There was absolutely no communication with the two of them. Like, it's very obvious why they broke up. And then the friend was so weird, and there's just like a lot of stuff that happens. Check the trigger warnings because there is some weird stuff that goes on in this book, but I just like, it just was not what I was expecting to happen. And it also just shifted so quickly from being like, ha ha ha, we're having fun and like we're gonna be in love again, to like, what the heck is going on? So that one was not my favorite read. I will still read more Beth O'Leary books because ultimately I really enjoy her as an author, but that was definitely not one for me. The next book that I read after that was A Lady's Guide to Scandal. I read Sophie Irwin's first book last year. It's called A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, and I absolutely loved it. That was one of my very favorite books of the year last year, and so I thought I would pick up the second one, and I enjoyed it a lot. This book is about Eliza, and she gets married off when she's really young, and she gets kind of put into a marriage that is not filled with love. She's not very happy, but now the book finds her 10 years later where her husband has just passed away and she is left a widow, still very young, and with a whole lot of money. And so this book is about Eliza kind of finding herself and finding what she wants to do, how she wants to live her life. This is a Regency romance, if I didn't say that already. This book is set in the early 1800s, and so Eliza goes with her cousin and moves, I think, to Bath. She decides to take a retreat from Bath because she's technically in mourning for the year, so she's not allowed to do anything fun or crazy, but she wants a little bit of time to herself. She wants a little bit of air to breathe. She doesn't want to stay in this old house that was her husband's house. She wants a fresh start. So she moves to Bath and she makes some friends, and she gets really into her hobbies and her crafts and kind of learns who she is as an adult and as a person, a woman, without any marital obligations. And then, yeah, the story kind of goes from there. There is some romance, there's a little love triangle situation. I thought this book was really fun. It was well written, well thought out. It was very like wholesome and sweet. I had a really good time with it, and that is A Lady's Guide to Scandal. Then after that, I was still in my little Regency era, and so I picked up The Ladies Rewrite the Rules by Suzanne Alain. This book was so similar to the last one because it was also about a widow, but in this book there are a number of suitors that come up to the widow's home, and she's like, how did these men find me? Why are they here trying to court me? And she discovers that she's actually in a book that's being distributed in London that is called like the Bachelor's Directory to eligible women. So she finds this book and she's absolutely furious, and so she goes and hunts down the man who wrote it, and like tells him off. She's like, what is your problem? I can't believe you would do this. And then she notifies all of the women that are in the book and says, hey, this is what's going on. Like, there are a bunch of people out here trying to find us for our money and our fortune hunters. And so then, as the title says, the ladies rewrite the rules. And so this book is really about the women taking back control and not letting the men walk all over them and not giving the men the satisfaction of trying to fortune hunt them. And it was a really sweet and fun story. There is definitely some romance, but it really is just like a girl power kind of book, and I thought it was really sweet and fun. After this, I read The Blonde Identity by Ally Carter, and I had a really great time with this book. I love Ally Carter. I used to read all of her books when I was younger. I love so much The High Society and The Gallagher Rolls. I love those books. And so this is Ally Carter's first adult book, and it was fun. It was like, you kind of have to go into it with the expectation of like, it's not going to be a literary book by any means. It reads really, really similarly to her YA. It's quite simply written, but this is so fun. This book is about a girl who wakes up in the ground in the snow in Paris one day and has absolutely no idea who she is, but she's on the run from the police and from a bunch of spies because people keep trying to kill her, and she's just trying to get away from them. So I thought this book was really fun. It's a great afternoon. I was in Florida when I read this, so it was like a super fun vacation afternoon read, and I had a lot of fun with it. So you kind of go with this girl as she is running away, trying not to be killed, but also like trying to put the pieces together of who she is, where she came from, what's going on. There is some romance, there is a lot of action, a lot of adventure. It's really fast paced, but it's really a story about finding yourself. I thought this was so fun. It's really lighthearted, it's really chill, and it was a great read. Okay, the last book that I read in February was Assistant to the Villain. These, like, all of the books that I read are kind of similar, but this book I had a really fun time with. This is just fun. Like, this was not a serious book in any way. It was so silly, it was so outlandish, but I had a really good time with it. Basically, this book is about Evie, who finds herself working for the villain in her village, and he is trying to like take down the crown. So it's a story from like the opposing perspectives that you would normally read a story from. It's not about the good guy, it's about the bad guy, but it's very like morally gray, because is he really the bad guy? But he is like, he's the villain, and it's so silly, it's so fun. It does end on a cliffhanger, so there is a second book coming out. I didn't know that when I was reading it, but I wish I did. But there is a second book coming out soon that I will definitely read. I had a lot of fun with this book, and I thought it was a good time. But those are the books that I read in February. Now let's talk about March. Okay, in March I read 2 books. I had a pretty busy month. We were driving back from Florida, and it didn't happen for me. So the moods were all equal here: reflective, informative, funny, lighthearted, and emotional. Everything was medium paced. Interesting. And then one of my books was 300 to 500, and one of my books was less than 300 pages. I read 1 fiction and 1 nonfiction book in March, and look at all the genres just those 2 books were. That's a lot of genres. And this was my first audiobook of the year. So I read 1 audiobook and I read 1 book on my Kindle. I don't rate nonfiction, so the nonfiction book has no rating, and the other book has 4.75 stars. So that other book that I read, the first book I read this month, is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was another reread for me. I love Emily Henry. I think my favorite book for sure is Happy Place, but Book Lovers is a very close second. This book is about Nora and Charlie, and Nora is a book agent and Charlie is an editor, and they are kind of not enemies, but they're like work rivals. They met once in the past, they did not get along. Nora really dislikes Charlie. She thinks he's a huge prick. When Nora's sister invites her on vacation to a really small town, she finds herself running into Charlie everywhere, and she doesn't understand why he's here in this small town. She doesn't understand why he's kind of charming now, but they end up spending a lot of time together and really getting to know each other. I really enjoyed this book. I really think I would rate it higher, but the sister character drove me absolutely crazy. She is a little much. I did not like that character at all, but Charlie Lastra owns my whole heart. I adore him so much. He is maybe my favorite book boyfriend in the Emily Henry universe. I don't know. I had such a great time rereading this book. I loved it just as much as I did the first time. Then the other book that I read / listened to this month was the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. And I had a lot of fun with this. We listened to this in the car while we were driving home from Florida. And it's told in essay format. It's read by John Green, which is really, really great. And it's such an interesting book. It really dives into the like inner workings of John Green's brain, which I thought was really fun. And it was just very existential. So the book is a collection of essays from like very serious, like global sciencey things to his love for Dr. Pepper. There's a whole spectrum of books. And I thought it was really fun. I'm glad I listened to it on audio instead of reading it because I love John Green's voice and like hearing it from his perspective. It was also so fun to get so much insight on his other books, which I have read all of. I grew up reading all of his books as they would come out and I just really love him. So I'm glad that I finally got to read that book. It is very much so a pandemic book. He wrote it during 2020 and 2021. So a lot of it reflects on his experiences and his thoughts during the pandemic. And I think that if I had read it kind of closer to that time, it maybe would have held more value to me. Like I would have maybe thought of it higher, but because he was feeling this deep way in the pandemic and we're kind of so far removed from it now, it was interesting to look back on and to like remember how we were feeling during that time, but also good to know that like we made it, we're okay. So that was the Anthropocene Reviewed. Okay, the last book that I wanted to talk about is a book that I DNF'd. This is the last book that I read in March. I picked it up and I was so excited. I even started a reading blog for this book. And I'm so sad because people love this book so much. But that is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Yeah, man. I first started reading this book on audio because I've heard really good things about the audiobooks for the series. They're created by a production company called Graphic Audio, and they do like, their slogan is like a movie for your mind. And so when Feyre is walking through the forest, you can hear like forest sounds and it's narrated by a whole cast of characters. So I really thought the audiobook would be for me. I got 15% in through the audiobook and could not do it. I did not like it at all. So I thought I would pick up the physical book and I got, I think, a full 50% of the way through and I just couldn't get into it, wasn't enjoying it. The writing was just not for me. The characters, like Feyre just felt so whiny. I don't know. So I wanted to ask you, should I keep going with this series? Like, should I just watch Carrie's video and find out what happens in the book? I just can't bring myself to finish it. I really did not enjoy it. And it's one that I was so excited for because I thought I would really love this series. I feel like everyone loves this series. And so I was so excited to kind of like be a part of that. But yeah, this was kind of a flop for me and I'm really sad about that. Anyways, that is all of the books that I read so far this year. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're still here, I love you so much. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I will hopefully see you for the next one. Bye!